Okay, everybody. Thanks for attending, everybody, today. This is going to be the first in our kind of an interdisciplinary effort that we have. We have a Small Farms Local Food Group working with our community and economic development people in Extension, and as we have in a lot of different things. Recently, though, the conversation has kind of revolved a little more around community development and using local foods as community development. So what we wanted to do here was over the next few months was have some dialogue, and hopefully have dialogue such that people can begin to have a conversation in their community and among themselves and growers and local officials, and help to enhance how local food can enhance our communities. When you registered, you saw there was a couple of different dates that we have, and different speakers and topics for each of the sessions. Today we've got kind of an introductory type session to the whole series, and we're going to get right into this. And the first speaker on our program today is Laura Brown, and you can see her credentials there with the University of Wisconsin Extension, and glad to be working with multi-state colleagues here. And so we're going to kind of have Laura kick us off here and kind of lay the foundation for what we might be talking about in terms of a broad picture here with local foods and community development. And with that, I'm going to turn my mic over to you, Laura, and you can go from there.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to kick off this series. This is a conversation that I know a lot of people around the country are having right now, both within Extension and outside of Extension. So I'm going to do a little bit of the 360-degree view. Really briefly, like it says here, I'm a community development specialist with the Center for Community and Economic Development with the University of Wisconsin. So I'm based in Madison, but my primary focus is rural community development. So I work with rural communities around the state, many of whom are really looking to local food systems as an alternative for community and economic development. I'm sure many of you kind of know this, if not the data, then anecdotally, that what we're seeing right now in terms of interest in local foods is sort of the combination of the perfect storm of kind of trends, demographic trends, and interest in local foods from the consumer perspective, and that's really been driven by a variety of different things. One is an interest in solving this diet-related disease crisis that we're seeing as come onto the national agenda, and broader consumer interest in knowing where food comes from. So as you can see from this data here, both the direct sales of local foods and the number of farms that are selling foods directly to consumers has really skyrocketed in the past decade. And that's been the case around the Midwest, including Illinois, and I assume most of you are from Illinois, but in Wisconsin as well. So as a result of some of these trends, and since I started in community food systems about a decade ago, I've definitely seen a variety of different initiatives at the community level that have been set up to integrate local food systems into mainly grassroots programming. I think it's only now in the past few years that we're seeing some of these goals get better integrated into local and state policy. But these are some of the goals of food systems initiatives. So the improved nutrition, health, and diet-related disease, addressing environmental sustainability issues, transparency and food safety, food quality, certainly social justice issues. And we're really going to focus, I think, in this series and in the next 10 minutes on the community and economic growth and development. And that's, of course, as a result of the recession, because many small communities, particularly rural communities, look at the assets that they've got and they see, well, we've got a lot of small farms or a lot of farms in general, and that's because that's our asset, that's what we really want to focus on in terms of our economic development strategy. So let's briefly talk a little bit about what economic development means. And I think it's important to reflect on this a little bit, because when we're doing local programming, it's really easy to sort of move into that advocacy role. because we all like, going to the farmer's market. We enjoy buying local foods. We, maybe we have a community garden, and there are lots of benefits to having a community garden. But if we are thinking about local foods as economic development, I think it's important to run it through this filter of what exactly is economic development and how is this contributing. So according to the International Economic Development Council, which I'm involved in, the economic development can be defined as a program, a group of programs, or activity that seeks to improve economic well-being and quality of life for a community by retaining, there's a word missing here, and that is both creating and retaining jobs that facilitate growth and provide a stable tax base. So it's not just retaining jobs, although quite honestly that's probably a big focus of a lot of what we do in economic development is job retention, but also job creation, and that comes up in terms of local food programming a lot in our support for local entrepreneurs. So when we start thinking about how do we integrate local food systems into an economic development strategy, these are some of the arguments that are often used to promote local foods as economic development. So a little bit of interpretation here, shorter supply chains resulting in higher profits. So that's assuming that if we're supporting smaller farms versus, say, more conventional commercial scale farms, those producers are more likely, again this is the assumption, are more likely to be purchasing locally. So shortening the supply chain, maybe they're purchasing more local products themselves, so that's resulting in higher profits. The second argument would be the ability to charge higher prices. So this is the premium that a producer might get for actually having a local product. Perhaps they can charge more because people want to pay more for things that are local or organic or sustainable. And again, it's important to differentiate those because not all organic or sustainable products would necessarily be local. And then more profits being retained in the local economy. So if that farm is purchasing locally, more of those dollars are recirculating in the local economy. So these are sort of the economic arguments for integration of local foods into your economic development strategy. Now, whether or not these things have been tested is a big question. Do we really know that local foods contributes to economic development? Well, we do. There are a lot of regional studies. Perhaps you've seen some of these. They often use what's called an M-plan or input-output model, where you're making a number of assumptions and basically running some numbers through a statistical formula that tells you how what the economic impact is of local food purchasing. So that's one way to learn about the impact of local foods on your local economy. I think it's actually easier for communities to take a look at data that's already publicly available to you, and that is, for the most part, direct market data. So when I say direct market data, I'm referring to information about farmers markets, CSAs, that stands for community supported agriculture, and direct sales for human consumption. And that data is all publicly available through the agricultural census. Now that data right now is a little bit old because the last time the census was done was in 2007, so we're eagerly anticipating the updated census data, and that will give us a little more information about direct market sales, direct to consumer. What we don't know, which I think is really important, is we don't have much information on intermediated markets. So this is the sales to restaurants, to hospitals, to institutions that may, there's research showing that this may account for significantly more local food sales than the direct-to-consumer sales alone. And you can see some of those numbers there. So why is that? Well, it's likely that the intermediated sales are significantly greater in quantity. They involve a little bit larger scale farms. And it's fairly likely, we don't know this, but it's fairly likely that the intermediated sales would have greater economic impact than direct sales. So we wanted to test this. A group of colleagues and I in Wisconsin pulled together some information to really look at, does local foods, do the sale of local foods have economic impact or impact on measures of economic growth? And what we found was that it actually has very little impact in terms of the measures that we used. And of course, the data that's available is on direct sales. So these are mainly small farms with direct sales of under 25,000. So this slide sort of shows you, it gets a little bit into the statistical methods that we use, but you can kind of ignore that and just take a look at some of the variables that we started including. So what we did was create an index of local food systems that included some of these things that we thought would be related. So part of the food system, that would be farms with direct sales, number of farms with small acreage, farms that are producing mainly fruits and vegetables. We've got the dollar value of direct sales, so you can take a look at some of these. And we did a number of, like I said, statistical analysis to determine if these variables were related. We also did some mapping of that local foods index, which is kind of interesting. And in a minute, I'll show you a site where you can download some of the mapping data yourself to see how your county stands in terms of that local food index. And I want to go back to that caveat that the index that we used was based on that secondary data that was available. So it was data mainly on direct sales. Because we don't have the intermediated sales, what we can say is that whatever estimates we come up with, we're probably vastly underestimating the economic impact in the local food system simply because we don't have other data about the intermediated impact. So if you have questions as I'm going through this, I'm pretty quick here. I'm going through this pretty quickly, so feel free to go ahead and type a question in the chat box. So what does this mean for you and your community? And again, I don't know exactly where you're all coming from or how you're involved in local food systems, but I think it's really important before you start integrating local foods into your economic development strategy. I mean, granted, you probably have organizations and groups of people that are interested in doing this from the grassroots level. But if you're really thinking about local foods as an economic growth strategy, I think it's important to step back and do a SWOT or some sort of community assessment to look at what are your real assets, what is your physical food-related infrastructure, so your distribution infrastructure, your aggregation infrastructure, who are your major employers, really understand your economy, what's happening there. And then what are some of the demographic or other trends that are affecting your community? So, are your farmers aging like they are in most of the Midwest? And I would guess in Illinois that's the case also. What are sort of the priorities that you can work on in your community if what you want to do is support your food system, continue to grow a local food system? Some of the sources of data that we used to do this analysis, like I said, are available to all of you, and I put some of them here. And I also want to show you the portal where you can go ahead and take a look at some of those yourself. So this should be coming up. This is the North Central Region County Food Systems Profiles portal. Okay, so what you'll want to do if you'd like to use this is go to the drop-down box and find your county on the alphabetical list. And what this will pull up for you, let's see if I have Illinois. What you'll see is a profile with the data, including a number of food systems indicators on the profile. And then if you'd like to take a look at a map, we have all these indicators on using the Get Us Ord maps, so the hotspot maps that I showed you earlier that have the blue and the red. So you can browse through and take a look at some of these. Again, the caveat is that a lot of this data is a little bit old, and that's not something we can change until we get the new census data out. But what we think this is really good for is helping you get a sort of handle on what's happening broadly in your community around your food system, because it's if you're working with a nutrition-related group or an ag-related group, it's likely that they have data on that particular aspect of the food system. But getting that sort of 360-degree broader look at the food system, what's happening, where are our assets, and how might we take a broader look at how we can address the issues in our food system if what we want to do is support local foods development as economic development. Okay, I'll go back to my slides then. So these are some of the various programs that I've seen here in Wisconsin and across the nation for addressing local foods as economic development. Like I said earlier, you know, a lot of these are grassroots initiatives, and I think we're only just now, I'm starting to see some better evaluation of these programs according to the goals that we discussed earlier. So, you know, if there's a particular program that is addressing economic growth and development, I think we're just starting to think through how can we evaluate those to really determine if they're being effective at growing jobs or contributing to the quality of life in our community. And if any particular program that we're doing, say a farmer's market or a community garden, isn't having the economic impact that we thought it would, I think it is also important to say, well, maybe it's having impacts in other aspects of community development that are really valuable, and maybe those are things that we want to continue to grow in our community. So if a community garden is growing relationships between the private sector and some of our schools, maybe it's a public space where people can meet and it's building our social capital, that's great, and maybe that's something you want to do. It's just important to know, you know, how is this contributing to our community, and I think we can also strengthen our ability to evaluate some of those other outcomes of local foods activities, even if, you know, we can't say it's creating 50 jobs in our community. Another tool that I wanted to bring to your attention is a toolkit that I was involved in that's just been published. It's called Toward a Sustainable Community, and it's a toolkit for local government. So this really focuses on strategies and actions that local governments can take on to support not just local food systems. There's a whole variety of sustainability concepts that are covered in this toolkit, but there is a chapter on local food systems that I was involved in. So if you're interested in how a local government in particular could support local food systems, there's some recommendations available to you in this document. And I think I've gone a little bit over, so I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd appreciate and stay for any questions that people have. Yeah, and I'll go back to the slide for this. So the URL for the toolkit is right here. There's a list of food systems resources available here, and then definitions of all the indicators. And what I wanted to show you was we do have a profile discussion guide and sample discussion guides if this is something that you do want to use in your community. So I think with that, I'll wrap up and sort of let our moderators take over. Ellen, this is Laura. I hope this is the URL you were looking for. And I will type the URL for the profiles in the chat box.
Okay. I'm Kyle Cecil. I'm going to present part of this, a few minutes, with my colleague Deborah Kavanaugh Grant. And what we wanted to do in this portion of the session is for local community officials is give a real broad overview of what gaps are. And you might hear this acronym, which stands for Good Agricultural Practices, and maybe wonder you know, what people are talking about. So what I wanted to do was I'll kind of give you a background here on 7 or 8 slides on what gaps are, and we do the training for that in Extension. We work with growers around the state on going through good agricultural practices training. So I'll tell you what that is, the nuts and bolts, and then Deborah, my colleague, will come in and talk a little bit more about you know, why this might matter, or why from a local official might, you know, you be interested in this and have this on your radar. So we'll just start going here. And as before, if you have any questions at all, just type them in the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner, and we'll get those. And certainly later on when we're done here, finished up, we'll have kind of a roundtable here to ask questions of anybody. So with that. So gaps, good agricultural practices, and what are they? Well, they're no more or no less than a set of strategies that growers can use to help reduce the risk of foodborne contaminants in our food supply. And that's very important that we train producers as well as people handling product and people at home know how to handle food so we don't have food contamination, because it only takes one one bad incident to cause a lot of heartache for people and a lot of sick people. We've seen that over the last couple of years nationally with some things. So it's just as important for a grower of 1 acre of strawberries to know about good agricultural practices and what they can do with strategies under their control to help ensure food safety as it would be for a multi-state producer of strawberries. Scale really doesn't matter. They both have things that they can do to help the situation, and that's what we do training on. So GAPS covers everything from start to finish on a farm, from initial production of that product and everything that goes into that up until the product is sold. In a CSA, as Laura mentioned, a community-supported agriculture system, a farmer's market, a grocery store, and all the direct-to-consumer type things. But in all of these different steps, there's opportunities for different types of pathogens, which are bacteria, viruses, and parasites, to contaminate food. And we cover the gamut in training from, for instance, on the left-hand side, it's kind of a stark picture, but we go over personal hygiene and how to recognize illness in workers and what you do if you have a sick worker and how you isolate them and make sure they're not handling food and things like that. So we go all the way from that through the middle picture here is obviously bird droppings. Bird droppings are a big source of contamination out there if not handled properly. And in a nutshell, basically what producers will do when they develop their food safety plans is they'll instruct and teach all of the people that are handling that product that if something is contaminated or soiled with bird droppings, you basically don't use that and you don't use a lot of the produce that is around that. So those are the sorts of things that you think about prior to ever being in these situations on as to how you will handle them. And then finally, on the final picture there, I just wanted to make note that food safety doesn't end on the farm. It begins a whole other aspect once it meets the consumer's kitchen. So there's as much responsibility on the consumer to ensure their food safety as there is on farmers growing it. So a couple of the areas that we go over. So for instance, we have this growing medium out there. We're blessed with this rich soil here in Illinois that's wonderful at growing crops of any sort. Corn, soybeans, pumpkins, cucumbers, lettuce, you name it. We do a really good job at growing that, and we're blessed with this soil. When we amend soil or when we improve soil, like for instance adding manure to soil, we talk with producers and train producers in how to handle manure in terms of composting. There's a very specific way that fresh manure is composted so that the bacterium and issues, the pathogens in that compost are handled and killed so that we don't have any contamination when we apply that to the land in specific rates. We talk to them about proper application, how and when and where to do that. We spend quite a bit of time talking about exclusion of animals, to the extent possible. Just as we are blessed with these nice soils in the state of Illinois, we are also blessed with a pretty significant deer population, and it's a little hard to keep deer out a lot of these places, but once again, there are exclusion measures that you can do to help keep that wildlife out of there to the extent possible. So we talk about that. But what's the purpose of all of this conversation is once again to reduce the risk of microbial contamination. So then we start moving down the input chain, if you will, of all the things that plants need to grow. So plants obviously need water. And we talk with growers in GAPS that you need to make sure you're testing your water and testing it consistently, so a couple times a year at least. You need to be protecting the wellhead that you have out there, so you're not going to have, say within a certain amount of feet, generally that's about 200 feet, you're not applying any sort of pesticide or fertilizers or anything like that that could get into your groundwater. But the key thing we talk to with producers about the clean water side is that all of the water used in their systems, their drip irrigation systems, what have you, must be potable. So it must be able to be for people to drink it. And we cover topics like, why don't you use surface water, and because of some of the contaminants and things like that in there. But we talk a great deal about clean water as an important component of their good agricultural practices plan. And remember that when we talk about this, the ultimate goal of this is for them to write a food safety plan for their specific operation, so that we know exactly, the things that are pertinent to their operation and what they grow and how they do it, so that they can reduce all of these contaminants and raise as safe a food products as they possibly can. So once again, we spend a lot of time in the personal hygiene section, and it's not to, we realize everyone knows how to wash their hands, how to do a number of different things, but for instance, depending on the size of your operation, you may have some workers from a different culture than ours, and restroom facilities are different and used different in different cultures around the world. Well, that's actually a conversation you need to have, so that we know that those washroom facilities and hand washing stations are used and used properly, but it's something you might not think of. And there's a lot of signage and things that we have available for growers, and they can download and they can have, in terms of where the wash stations are, where the restrooms are, how things are handled, and what have you. So we spend a great deal of time on that. We spend a lot of time actually within that section too talking about how to recognize illness, because everyone is really happy to have a job, and sometimes they may come to work feeling a little under the weather, and that's not good if you're handling produce. So the managers of these farms, the grower owners, have to recognize that sort of thing. So we're moving down the line here. We start to talk about handling, storage, and transportation, and there's various different things that we get into there. And so what we're talking about is making sure that we have really clean surfaces. So a real-world example of this would be on the bottom right-hand corner. You can see basically a plastic tote. Plastic totes are a lot easier to clean than wood. Wood will tend to hold contaminants in it. And so it's not a really good idea to be using a lot of wood products. So that's something that people will write into their plan, their food safety plan, as to what the totes are used for, how they're stored, how they're cleaned, etc. Other things we talk about is disinfecting these and sanitizing these things. How do you know how much, say, bleach you need to put in based on the chemistry of the water that you're using? Because not everyone will add a tablespoon of this or a teaspoon of that. You have to know how to check that, so we go over that. Foods at proper temperature, that's a really big thing, because these products are highly perishable that we're working with. So we will talk about handling fresh product out in the field. For instance, when we harvest them, you want to make sure they're in the shade, they're cooled as soon as possible, and held at that lower temperature, so that we don't have any quality issues with those, because as these products break down, you can increase the vulnerability to some of these bacteria and viruses and fungal issues that you can have. So we talk a lot about that. So as we're working with growers, and we talk with growers all the time, we stress to everybody, there's no one way to guarantee that everything we're going to eat on a daily basis is going to be completely safe. 100% food safety is not something that's probably ever going to be achieved, because we're working within a natural system. Mother Nature has a way of getting around a lot of our fail-safes that we have out there. But the key to it is just what I have down there on the bottom, where we can reduce the risk of the things that are under our control. And I mentioned again, in the first few slides we had an example of someone working on a farm, and then all the way to the kitchen sink in the consumer's kitchen. we don't have much control over the consumer's kitchen, but we do have control in producing that crop and harvesting and handling it properly. So that's the gist of the gaps that we work with and talk about. I think I got one slide here. Yeah, I want to show this one slide. We're not going to go over it, but what it does, it basically shows of the 4 different areas that we work with growers in terms of developing a good agricultural practices, food safety plan for those. These are all the sorts of things that we'll spend time on discussing with them. Now, what they do from there is they take all of that and then they begin to write that plan like I talked about that's specific for my farm, because one food plan, a template for a food safety plan, cannot work for all farms because there's so much variability out there in farms as there is in farmers. So these are all the sorts of things that we talk about with people with gaps. Now let's do one quick thing here. I can take a few questions. If anybody has them, they can type them into the chat box. And if you're thinking about that, you can type those in, and I'll try to get to those. What we're going to do is now I've given you an idea of what gaps are. My colleague Deborah Cavanaugh-Grant, who's a small farms educator in the Springfield area, is going to talk to you a little bit about, the so what side of this. Why does this matter? So if you have some questions, type it in. If not, I'm going to hand it over to Deborah, and you can take it away, Deborah.
Thanks, Kyle. As Kyle mentioned, just to recap what good agricultural practices are, they're operations and procedures that farmers use on the farm to minimize risks related to foodborne illness. And as Kyle stressed, it's not an issue of size because microbes aren't going to worry about the size, although there are issues related to production systems that might suggest that there's a greater possibility of microbial contamination. And as Kyle mentioned, when you're looking at a good agricultural plan, you're discussing issues in your plan, and as he also mentioned, it's relevant to that individual farm in the areas of soil, water, personal hygiene, handling, storage, and transportation, and these are involving all aspects of the farm related to production and harvesting. And this photo here is an example of an on-farm washing station. And so I would like just to take a minute here if people could look at this. And is there anything in this picture that would suggest to you that the farmer is thinking about good agricultural practices in terms of the way that this is designed? If someone would be willing to type that in. I'm going to need you guys to shade, yeah. Okay, but in terms of good agricultural practices, when Kyle showed one of the slides with bird droppings, is there something, buckets? Well, how about the fact that there's a covering? Yes, covered area, yeah. So that there is a covered area there. We can't discern from this photograph in terms of the water quality or how it's testing, but you can see that there's a covering there. Also how things are separated in the production system in terms of things that are washed and how they're being packed. So this is something that farmers need to consider regardless of the size of their operation. So what's driving on-farm food safety? And I thought this was a really interesting photograph. This is a controversial issue for farmers if anyone is paying attention in the news with the Food Safety Modernization Act. Currently, there's a lot of public debate. There's an opportunity. That's one of the reasons we're talking to you about this today, too, is there's still an opportunity for you to engage as a farmer, if you are a farmer, or as an eater, which we all are, about this topic. So some of the issues that are driving food safety, in recent years, there's been obviously a growing interest in locally produced fresh fruits, vegetables, and other food products. And farmers markets have become a common feature of local efforts to encourage community economic development by promoting locally grown products. Although with Laura's comments, I'm going to need to look at that data set and rethink what my opinions are regarding that topic. The health benefits of eating lots of fresh fruits and vegetables have been clearly demonstrated, and they're obviously encouraged both nationally and locally by health authorities. And then, as Laura alluded to, given the choice, many consumers prefer locally grown products and are often very willing to support the hard work of local growers who bring fresh and wholesome products into their communities. But as Kyle mentioned, a small farmer or any farmer that is growing produce has to think about food safety. And so when they develop their farm safety plan, that can be separate from how they're selling their products. So for example, farmers markets currently, at least most of them, do not require that farmers that are vendors have a food safety plan and or if they are audited. Some are encouraging farmers to have these, but at this time it isn't required. But there are several avenues of marketing for farmers where these concerns are requiring that farmers not only have a farm safety plan, but that they are audited. And these could be grocery stores, some restaurants, and obviously if you're taking this produce to be processed. There's a nuance, and Kyle alluded to it too, where a food safety plan and an audit are two separate things. We won't get into it now, but you can see that some of these things are drivers for why farmers would be concerned about food safety. And then as I alluded to too, with the Food Safety Modernization Act, the government is playing a key role in these issues with the Food and Drug Administration, the USDA, and the cottage food law from the Illinois Department of Public Health. So all of these regulations and issues of inspection are a concern for farmers. So the conversation needs to turn to what do local officials need to know about good agricultural practices? And I'm going to ask you to participate a little bit more too. So farming is a local business. And here's two pictures that I found that to me are evocative of farmers markets as local businesses, and I wanted to get the pictures of the city. The one on the left is the old Capitol Market that's in downtown Springfield, and you can see on there the old Hilton Hotel. And then if people have ever been to downtown Chicago, this is Federal Plaza, and this is a really excellent farmers market if you ever get a chance to go there. But local officials have opportunities to make decisions that affect agriculture. And in the areas they can work in are including ordinances, land use policies, zoning issues, and several more. The more that officials know about what is involved in producing an agricultural product, the better their decision making can become. For example, many officials may be surprised at the detail of a farm food safety plan. And as we're discussing, Kyle was just touching the tip of it. We spend day-long workshops in providing information about these plans. Or local officials might not be aware of the expense that's involved in implementing standards and going through an audit. If officials are interested in the food system in their community, I think it's imperative that they understand the barriers and issues of bringing food to the table and what's all involved in that process. So we're framing our discussion today if as a local officials, this issue of good agricultural practices is of import to you. So now I'm going to ask you to participate. Just ask for you to write one issue that you feel farmers are facing in your community in the area of food safety. I have one response, field cooling. Are there any other thoughts? Yeah, that's a good one. Safety procedures for various clients, restaurants, hospitals, grocery, and groceries. Okay, well, I'm just going to share, if there aren't any other ones, I'm going to share my thoughts about some of the food safety issues that farmers face and that why this would be, there's another comment on washing. So why should Illinois produce growers care about food safety? And these two women are graduates of the Central Illinois Farm Beginnings Program, and they're both currently farming and obviously growing produce. So from a farmer's perspective, no one wants customers to get sick. You're in the business of growing healthy food, and that's not something that you want to do. So that everyone who grows produce needs to be concerned about food safety. And I think this direct connection and a farmer's knowledge about these practices is important as reports of these foodborne illnesses become more frequent in the news. And I'm just going to share this with you. There's this really interesting website, and the name is Barf Blog, which is interesting in itself. But if you want to learn more about foodborne illnesses, this is a great resource because every day from across the globe, you will get these emails about foodborne illnesses, and I think it definitely has changed my perspective about food, reading those every day. The other thing, and I think you're probably all aware of this, and if you're an official, local official, you understand that the actions of someone can have a huge impact on many. And so I'm just showing here this example of this listeriosis that was linked to this Rocky Ford cantaloupe from this Jensen farm. They were from Colorado. And that incident caused lots of issues in our community and in their community. And so according to the CDC, I went and looked, 146 people were sickened, 36 people died. That corporation, that business has filed for bankruptcy. They paid out millions of dollars to the families for the deaths and the sickness that was caused by this outbreak from their farm. And then I guess I would just share with you, can you imagine what the impact was to anyone growing cantaloupes that summer, regardless of the size of their farm? So here was this outbreak. It was in the news every day. So anybody that had cantaloupes, people just were reticent to buy them. So I think farmers care about these things too because they understand that it's important for all of them. So for example, to date, we have not had any reported incidents of foodborne illnesses from farmers markets in Illinois. But as a person who serves on the Illinois Farmer Market Association board, I know that it's on the radar screen for our organization and that what would happen if that did occur and the impact for the vendors and for consumers buying from farmers markets. And then one of the things I'd like to share with you is the idea of food safety not only as a health issue, but as a possible marketing tool. And there's with a press release that was shared by a woman from Kansas State University, a health professional there, and she suggested that if a farmer had this on their radar screen and was at their farmer's market, that they could then put up a sign saying, I have a farm safety plan. There is a grower that teaches with us, our Extension Good Ag Practices program, who went through the program and received a certificate, and he's put it in a frame where at the farmer's market he shares that with customers so they can see that people can ask him questions about, what is he doing regarding food safety. So if you're looking at ways from a business model to differentiate yourself from other farmers, perhaps this awareness and developing a food safety plan could also be a marketing tool. So I'd like to just close here with some take-home points between Kyle's comments and my own, is that our perspective is that most local growers are very proactive regarding food safety, and it is on their radar screen. And as we mentioned before, many of them are doing these things to reduce or eliminate microbial, well, you can't eliminate it, but reduce microbial contamination. Food safety takes place from the farm to the fork. So my feeling about this issue is that all of us are responsible for food safety. And so if you go to the farmer's market, it is incumbent on you when you buy this produce to take it home, wash it, and refrigerate it appropriately and things like this. All of us are responsible for food safety. Food safety practices are an important value-added benefit, or can be. And lastly, local officials who understand that food safety is an important part of producing local foods can help market those local businesses and to help grow the local economy. So are there any closing questions?
Does anybody have any questions on this section for Deborah or I? You can type them in there, and actually we'll open this up. I'm sure Laura is still on here. If you have a question for Laura that we could help answer, we'd be glad to do that, and I'll just give everybody a moment here.
I guess I would have a question of Laura because of her expertise in the information that she shared earlier. What is your thought about good ag practices and sort of the comment that I made that it could be a way to differentiate yourself from people and using it as a marketing tool?
Just to clarify, differentiating yourself using local as a marketing tool? Or using the good agricultural practices as a marketing tool?
Yeah, using the good ag practices. So, for example, someone's organic and there's attributes associated with that. So the farmer that I mentioned who went through our training program saw the opportunity to put his certificate up of taking that class and saying, I am aware of these things and I'm doing, a good job of dealing with food safety issues.
Yeah. To be honest, I haven't seen a lot of, I haven't seen research specifically on consumers' perception of GAP, but I guess sort of anecdotally, I would say that I think consumer understanding varies pretty significantly, and there's probably a niche set of consumers that have a little more awareness of good agricultural practices, and for them that probably would have an impact. I don't have a really good idea of how broad consumer understanding is, and so I guess that would impact whether that's something a business could really use as a sort of marketing tool. I didn't really answer the question, but
no, I think that there's a young man who's in contact with some of our extension colleagues, and he's involved with a project where he's writing a brochure specifically to consumers about these issues. And in it, he had these listed questions that I thought if you went up to a farmer at a farmer's market on a busy Saturday and started asking them all these questions, they would probably tell you to go away. But I think that's what you said, Laura, is that I think there's a range of awareness about these issues and concerns that citizens have. But for those that are interested, perhaps a farmer that's taking these things into consideration might be a business benefit. Might be stretching it too, but at least the farmer that we know, he thinks it helps his business.
Yeah. I don't think it could hurt, really.
Well, I wanted to say that from a marketing standpoint, it does seem to me that especially the more and more food safety issues we hear about, the local and having the food safety certificate mounted does seem like it should be reassuring to those who pay attention to it.
No, I think that's true, although there are people that have, food safety plans and have been audited who still have outbreaks of foodborne illnesses. And so I think, that's the issue too, where it gets really complicated. And I think a lot of the farmers that I work with, and I'm sure, or if you are a farmer on the phone, I mean, this whole thing can get really overwhelming. And I guess what I wanted to talk about in my little brief presentation was, as a local official, just even an awareness of what all of this is. And then if you are a local official that deals, with the public health department, if you're on the county board, how does that work?
Okay, well, that'll end it for today. Looking forward to speaking with everybody again in the coming weeks about this topic. And I want to thank all the speakers today. And Laura, thanks for bringing a Wisconsin perspective in to this. We appreciate you helping out. And Deborah, thank you. So with that, everybody have a great day. It's a beautiful day here in Illinois, across Illinois. Get out there and enjoy some of it, and we'll talk to you soon.